back all
So
day.
as soon as they get off, it's all gone. You know what?
Hi there. Hi. Good to see you. Good to see you too. We are
Good.
live streaming and
John, can you hear us?
I can. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome. All right, I'll call this meeting of the Climate Action Plan Committee for the City of Salem for Monday, July 8th. I'll call to order this meeting of the Climate Action Plan Committee for Monday, July 8th, 2024. Present are Hoy, Barney, and staff who we identified. So do we have any public comment? Great. We have a couple of folks. Come on up, come on up, please, so we make sure you can hear her. Introduce yourself and
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Hoy. I'm Bob Courtright from West Salem. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Salem and myself. For those of you who don't know me, I spent my career as the lead staff at the Department of Land Conservation and Development, working on transportation planning and planning for greenhouse gas emission. Main point I want to make to you today is that you're going to consider a couple of items dealing with transportation planning and this scenario planning work. And it's to urge you to do more and sooner as part of both of those efforts. The last 10 to 20 years of science, policy, and planning tell us what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. We need to reduce VMT, vehicle miles traveled, the amount of driving we do, by between 20 and 30%. We also know how to reduce VMT. I mean, the things that the city and any city in metropolitan area can do, and that's to plan for more walkable mixed-use development and to make walking and biking and transit safer and more convenient and more easily available, so that we double or triple the number of trips that are made by those modes. However, despite this knowledge, in the last 10 years of effort, we've made almost no progress in reducing VMT and increasing the share of trips made by everyone. In addition, our adopted plans, for example, our regional plans, anticipate that we'll make little or no progress in reducing VMT over the next 20 years. What that should tell us is we've got a pretty big lift to make in terms of reaching the goals that we have for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So a couple of things to think about as you're thinking about the TSP update and scenario planning is that they need to include the scale of changes to existing plans that will achieve our VMT reduction objectives. We're concerned about scenario planning because, frankly, it's too high level. What it's going to tell you is that, yes, you need to increase transit and bike and ped and make changes to land use. And if you do those things, you will reduce emissions. But we really need to get into specifics. So where do we provide for more compact development? How do we accomplish those increases in transportation mode share? So the specific recommendations for you are that scenario planning and the TSP should include a clear vision and proposal for accommodating most new housing and jobs in climate-friendly areas and along the core transit network, things you already have. The TSP update should focus on and prioritize pedestrian, bike, and transit improvements so that we get a safer, more convenient system, especially in those climate-friendly areas. Third thing we ought to do is defer roadway expansion projects. Our TSPs include boatloads, more than we will ever have money for roadway expansion projects that move us in the wrong direction in reducing VMT. We really need to put those on hold until we have a clear and effective strategy for reducing. And finally, you should include VMT reduction as one of those lenses as your climate lens to inform and guide policy decisions as proposed.
thank you. Are there any questions? Okay.
Mayor Hoy and member of the county, my name is Lori Doherty, I live in Ward 1, and I'm a co-coordinator of Food Systems Day in Oregon. And I don't think we have to tell you that, we're having a climate crisis. It is 10:05 and temperature is 85 degrees already. It's going over 100 today, my husband. So we're breaking daily records day by day. But I want to just endorse what Bob said, that in order to reduce people on travel, greenhouse gas emissions that are changing the climate, we have to pay a lot of attention to the way that our cities are built. I want to thank Eunice for our Salem for all the work done on zoning and encouraging mixed use in neighborhoods and this kind of thing. And keep it up. We still have more to do. And I have other things in terms of that. Like I just walked here, walked by them around and let them off. Okay. I will take the bus going back and I have an errand to run and it's getting hotter by the minute, so I don't want to do that walking than I could on the way out of here. But for me, personally, and also as a person very aware of climate, to get people to stop, to use their cars less or to stop altogether, needs to be a lot of attention to safety and convenience. Like Bob mentioned it, but I just want to expand on that a little bit. And for bikes and pedestrians and for people in wheelchairs, there are different kinds of issues that account for safety. For walking, there are sidewalks that are well maintained, you don't trip over in once. Bikes, you need sort of protection from the autos, you need to reduce speeds, for everybody. And a big deal for people on foot is in intersections, because that's where you face danger from cars. And I want to thank Virginia because she proposed a program, and they just instituted the start of it today on a certain part of downtown, which I just walked through, where the walk light goes on a few seconds before the green light for cars. So people walking have a chance to get into the intersection, be visible, and the cars will notice. Hopefully stuff for you. And that's a good thing. I want to thank Jimmy with Public Works, for Public Works getting it to happen quickly, and it started to happen today, because I just walked through some of those intersections on Church Street. So I guess that's just what I want to say. That we need to prioritize safety for bikes, pedestrians, people in wheelchairs, other ways. They get around that are not in cars, because that will make people feel more comfortable, driving less.
Thank you. All right, looks like that we're everybody on the line, or do we?
Lucy, did you have public comment that you wanted to say?
Okay. All right. Has everybody had a chance to look at the meeting minutes from May 13th?
I will go through all of the minutes. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Carries. Okay, we're going to turn it over to Julie Hanson and Eunice Kim, talk about transportation system plan update. And then, I guess just transportation TL1 and TL19.
Hope you don't ask me what TL1 and TL19 are.
We know.
Good. Okay, so we have a brief presentation, and then we'd be happy to take questions. So today's focus is really on the scenario planning process that Bob referenced. We are referring to this as phase 1 of our transportation system plan update because it is a requirement that we have to do by state rules that will inform what we have to include in our transportation system plan itself. So give a little bit of background on it, and then talk about what we've heard so far in community engagement and some questions and answers. So I guess I could advance rather than make you guess at what I'm thinking. So we've already really talked about, why are we doing this? This came out of the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rules from the state that were adopted in late 2022, about the same time as the Our Salem project. focuses on the reducing the greenhouse gas emissions for transportation, but also equity and housing choices. And it's our phase 1 of our update to the TSP. This is a regional process, so it's not just Salem, it is Salem, Kaiser, and Marion County working together to identify more sustainable transportation options and make sure people have a choice in how they get around. And I know it's come up before, but I'll mention quickly that Polk County, the reason they're not directly part of this is because of their population within our urban area is very small. And
Outside the city, inside the UGB.
thank you.
Yeah.
Outside the city, inside the UGB is small, and therefore they are not required to do it. And they requested an exemption because really, who would want to do extra work? But we are coordinating with them through our SCATS process, and of course they will be, we'll be closely coordinating with them as we update our TSP because they have an interest in what happens inside the city limits as well as outside. There we go. So we have state goals to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions that are essentially translated into that reduced vehicle miles traveled. And there are specific targets for the different metropolitan areas. You've heard us mention before that the target reduction is 30% from, but it's not just 30%, right? You see that there's a graduated reduction goals, targets in there. And this is from a 2005 base, and that's based on the state rules. So it's a little bit wonky. As part of our process, they have to go back and estimate what 2005 was in order to estimate what we are today, in order to estimate where we need to be in the future.
Quick question about that.
Yeah.
Have we increased since 2005? My guess is, yeah. Does that make sense? We had our base, and then I'm guessing we're here now, and we have to get not only back to the base, but below the base.
Do you remember?
We'll get back.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
get back. Because the other thing that's happened since 2005 is the method for evaluating greenhouse gas.
Well, and every method is a little different. So we have to be careful that we don't compare what comes out of this directly with what came out of our own GHG inventory because the methodologies are different. So as long as you're using a consistent methodology, then you can compare the results. So that's what we are working on with ODOT is funding this study, and they have a consultant team that uses this model and nationwide. And so it's a pretty well vetted model, but you can't compare it to our other models. And so that's the note about it being different from the target also being different from our own goal. We can definitely exceed this 30%, but at the moment, I think it's just safe to say, don't compare apples and oranges throughout this process. So this process is basically testing different levers to see what is going to get us to those goals. And some of the levers are listed up here. We've talked about increased transit ridership, active transportation, land use changes, a lot of which we've already put into place, at least in our regulations through our Salem process. Remote work options, is something that has definitely changed since 2005. And there are probably more opportunities going forward.
Julie, before you move on past this one, so we did a pilot with Kaiser and Chariots for free ridership for youth on the Chariots, and that we've since ended our part of that. Our participation with it is continuing through other funding. Do we know that drastically increased youth ridership? I mean, it's huge, I think. But I'm wondering, do we have any data to show that reduced vehicle miles traveled? Or did it just increase the amount of mobility for our youth? Which is okay.
I'm guessing we don't have the data. I mean, I think that the assumption is that yes, because the options were, if the kids weren't riding the buses, how were they getting where they were going? Either they weren't going,
right,
or they were getting rides from often parents. So, but I don't think we have a micro scale model to show that. But it's the type of action that is something that can really contribute to, meeting our VMT reductions. So the process of this scenario planning is a little bit, it can be a little confusing. And so let's see if I can explain this. So over at the left, what we initially did is we're comparing existing conditions with future, the 2050, assuming we're on current trends, right? See, like, okay, are we going to get to that 30% reduction without doing anything else? And just so you know, the answer is no.
Shocking.
So then the next comparison is to compare that same future under current trends with future using the some state-led assumptions. And it's referred to as the Statewide Transportation Strategy, or STS. Those assumptions include both things that the state controls, like, pricing, registration, vehicle mix, fuel mix, things that the locals don't control. It also includes assumptions for things that the locals would do, but the state's the one who made the assumption. So that comparison, and then we will have the opportunity to look at comparing, do we like what, the future with the state assumptions, or do we want to look at some other alternative assumptions? Let me just go to the next slide, because this this helps a little bit. So that initial comparison between our current trends and the future with state-led assumptions. So the PM project management team has received the preliminary results from that, and the state-led assumptions, we would reach that 30% reduction using those assumptions. So once that has been adequately documented and explained, it's going to come to the advisory committee to talk about, are we comfortable with these state-led assumptions, or do we want to develop additional alternate assumptions? And then we move into finally selecting our preferred scenario, whether it's the state-led assumptions or something different. The goal is to be done with this either by the end of the year or at the latest, I guess, partway through 2025. We'd really like it to be the end of the year, but it depends on how many alternative scenarios we end up having to look at, and then also just the consultant, how much time it takes to model those different scenarios.
Do we have a meeting scheduled? Because I don't see one on my calendar, and it's been a long time.
Yeah, I know. I did specifically ask that on Friday and talked to Brian Hurley with ODOT this morning, and he said that we don't have one yet. He anticipates late summer, early fall, and a lot of it is that trying to get the material to the point that it can be explained, because right now the versions we saw, we had that reference site scenario, we got like 100-page documentation of all these details, very technical, and we couldn't really understand it. And we're like, okay, this isn't ready to share. So anyway, we're trying to get through it, but I suggested that they send out an email to the advisory committee just to say, hey, it's been a while since we met. This is where we are, and this is what we're thinking. So anyway, there you are.
And one of the things we're trying to work out is in the last meeting with that project management team, they presented information like the state-led assumptions assumes that maybe like 30% of people are now biking and walking, or maybe we're charging double pricing on parking. But we want to understand, like, what does that mean for the city? Like, how many bike lanes or how many miles of, right? Like, what does that mean to us? What are the implications of that? And we don't quite understand that yet. So we, like, to make a decision, I feel like there needs to be a little bit more pushing out of what those assumptions mean.
So let's see. So, the preferred scenario has to meet that target, and then each of the 3 jurisdictions will be responsible for submitting it to the state to comply with the state rules. The scenario will also include performance measures and targets. Those are key to our updating our transportation system plan, because that's where we have to show that we are meeting those, and that will be a requirement. The scenario itself doesn't actually have to be adopted by the locals. Is it will be approved by DLCD, and from then going forward, all of our land use actions will have to comply with it, including updates to our TSP. So that's the tie-in with the TSP. So this spring, we have done some community engagement. We had a survey that was, well, first, I guess the goals: gather input, share information, engage traditionally underserved populations, and continue to strengthen and build relationships in the community. So this spring, we introduced the project. We had a survey that was open through June 30th. We received over 270 replies to that. We attended meetings and had an open house on May 29th. And we did a final push at the World Beat on the last 2 days of June and saying, hey, this closes tomorrow. So I'm trying to get a few more, a little bit more interest there. We have just gotten some preliminary feedback from the consultants on the survey results. This is, their initial take is that, most people supported ideas that related to active transportation, choices in how to get around, and mixed use development. There was less support for things related to electric vehicles, such as providing incentives or increasing charging opportunities. And there was also less support for the idea of limiting parking or charging for parking.
Would you say charging for parking even citywide, or what is that?
Generically, so it wasn't like charge for parking downtown. This was more like, workplaces charging for parking, and, just sort of the concept that parking would be made less convenient. And I think what we heard from, at least when we talked to the Equity Roundtable, we heard some concern about people who on the lower income scale really rely on their vehicles for, employment, and feeling like that there was a disproportionate impact to some of the lower income population, charging for parking and limited parking. So in terms of community engagement, once we get to the point that we have a recommended preferred alternative, we'll be going out again to share that as well as the policies, strategies, and those measures of how to meet the, how that we're going to test ourselves, gauge our progress. This says fall. Yeah, it's going to probably be winter, dead of winter, before we get to that. And that is all the slides that I have. And so Eunice and I would be happy to answer any other questions.
Questions? My primary question that you already addressed, which is, are we going to get this thing past glacial speed, which it doesn't seem that we are. It's really frustrating.
I will say that we are working actively with ODOT on other elements of TSP phase 2. So, so two different things. One, in terms of inventory. So we've collected a lot of the inventory information that we need for updating our TSP in terms of where we have sidewalks and where we have, streets and things. But ODOT has a project to set up a schema that can be used statewide for collecting this data and using it for TSPs. And Salem is going to be one of the test scenarios for that. I think it's Salem, Beaverton, and maybe Albany. So that, essentially we're getting our foot in the door, early, so that we will have our data in a format that supports that TSP right out the door. So that we just had, we just got the survey where our GIS people are pretty much lead on that, but that's one step. And then we are also actively scoping the RFP for the phase 2 TSP, and with the goal of actually being able to get started in January. You know, that may slip a little bit, but we, Eunice and I have reviewed the proposal requests, and we're meeting with the consultant this week, I think. Anyway, soon. So anyway, work isn't stopped while we wait for the scenario planning, but there is definitely certain things that's needed to trigger.
Any questions?
So, are you saying that phase 1 and phase 2 are kind of happening at the same time? Or we're doing work in phase 1 that's going to build towards, I mean, does that make sense? I'm confused by your last.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The phases aren't clean. It's not like you finish phase 1 and then you start phase 2. We are starting phase 2. We're in the early phases, starting phase 2 before phase 1 is done. There's certain things in phase 2 that we can't get to until phase 1 is done. But we're, you know, I mean, contracting with ODOT can take forever. And so I will say that a January start date with ODOT is pretty ambitious. That's what their people are saying, but we don't want to get done with the scenario planning and then have to wait 6 months or a year just to get through contract. So we're really trying to, you know, be ahead of it.
So they're overlapping.
They're overlapping. It's all sort of one, yes.
Question. So with scenario planning,
Yes.
I understand that, I feel like there's a tension here to where scenario planning can be so high level that it's pointless. And is the delay because they're trying to make it more meaningful? Did I ask that in a good way? I don't know.
I think so.
They're trying to dumb it down though, so we can understand it.
Well, I don't know if that's my question.
I think
That's what they're doing.
but we're trying to do it so that, okay, so say you decide that you want to put all your emphasis on transit. What does that mean? You know, and we're trying to figure out a way to communicate, get the consultants to explain what does that mean, and is that realistic, and what level of investment would that assume for our region, rather than just saying, okay, we're gonna, you know, increase transit. Does that mean we have, you know, Manhattan level transit service, you know, the subways? I mean, you know, what's realistic?
Would it be fair to say that we're trying to bridge that gap between an academic, scientific research modeling effort and practical on the ground? What can a local jurisdiction actually accomplish? And that's a challenge in government. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, and yeah, I would agree with some of the things that Mr. Cartwright brought up about, you know, scenario planning being high level, and we already know what the things are that, you know, make a difference. And so to a certain extent, we're trying to balance the, how do you say this? You know, what, how can you communicate this and understand it regionally with all of our parties? And anyway, I'm blanking on my thoughts, so we're going to abandon that thought. Instead, I'll just say we do have the other complication of working with 2 other jurisdictions, and Marion County and Kaiser. Marion County has, you know, has some quite different opinions. And so trying to make sure we can navigate that process and get to the end with a result that we can all defend and understand.
What happens if it fails?
Well, when we get to, you know, at a certain point, we're going to have a scenario, and then we're going to, they're only going to do one scenario. If Marion County decides they don't like it, then they just don't submit it and they deal with the consequences. We go ahead and submit it. And,
Our plan is to keep going.
right,
And
and
then
we,
now kill off.
and we understand that most of it also is gonna fall on Salem anyway, because we are the largest, you know, portion of the, you know, urban population in the region. And so, to some extent, maybe it doesn't matter as much, but we're in good faith, we're trying to work together. And so that part of being able to answer the hard questions is what right now the consultant team is not being, it has not successfully done to our satisfaction. So that means that we're not ready to have them, you know, go and like get taken apart by the, you know, advisory committee.
I have a question about the RFP
Mhm.
going out. So that's for the work that's gonna be just Salem specific.
Yes.
Okay, what are the parameters that we're putting around that RFP? What are the goals? What are the guidelines that we're asking for?
Well, we're asking that it meet the requirements of the CFAC, the Climate Friendly Equitable Communities rules. We're asking that it have a focus on active transportation. One of the requirements of those, the CFAC rules, is that it be financially constrained, which is not something we've done before, and so that's gonna be sort of a big focus
What
of
does that
it.
define? I'm sorry.
That means that basically we have to project how much money we think we will have to invest in transportation between now and 2050. And then we have to align our priorities to fit into that.
Okay.
So you mean the goal, the plan isn't a dream, it's actually a goal?
Actual practical.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that,
Realistic.
you know, ish, right? I mean, you know, there's so many that when you do a financial forecast that far, it's not actually financially constrained. It's not like money in the bank, right?
Right.
So it might assume that the voters will pass another bond measure in, you know, 10 years and it will be this much money. I mean, you know, so it's assumptions, but it will make it harder to include really big projects that, you know, really big dollar amounts, I guess. And then the prioritization factors are going to align with the, whatever we're come out of the regional scenario planning. So let's make the assumption that that's a lot of active transportation. So our prioritization of those financially constrained projects have to align with that. On the safety front, because we're doing the Vision Zero grant separately, we're basically saying that the TSP would basically fold in, you know, those results, but obviously there'll be some overlap in a lot.
And are those things mentioned in the RFP, the Vision Zero or Climate Action Plan, the Our Salem Plan, are those all, how are we linking those all together and checking off with each other that we're all going in the same direction? Because sometimes our transportation doesn't take into consideration our, you know, comprehensive plan for.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is part of it. And the way this request for services, what do they call it? Statement of Services, SOS. The statement of services is being written to be sort of a framework of, you know, for the consultants to respond to. So we've reviewed that SOS. So we've also seen a draft statement of work, which is more like 45 pages. And the statement of services is closer to 7 or 8 pages. So, so yeah, we're actively working towards getting that in place. There will have to be an intergovernmental agreement between Salem and ODOT, because ODOT is providing at least part of the funding for this. The timing of that is still a little uncertain because part of it is a certain amount of money that we're required to put in place. But sometime this fall-ish winter, we would have an IGA. Yes.
One more point here. I know I mentioned the Vision Zero and the Climate Action Plan, the Our Salem Plan. I also think that we need to, frankly, start with the transit plan that they've just recently approved, because if we're gonna try and get transit increased to the rates that we're hoping for, they're really gonna need to be given priority on our streets. And then the modes of transportation that support that network, so walking and biking. And so I know that they've done a lot of good work. And I'm wondering how that communication between the city and transit and the RFP is gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, transit element is actually required in the in the TSP. And so the fact that they've actually done a long range transit plan is very helpful and beneficial. And once again, if we, if transit is one of the measures that we land on, that's going to need to be a prioritization. We, meet regularly with transit staff. And so we're, trying to keep on the same page with different efforts. We have a meeting with them this afternoon. So yeah, and they are also part of the scenario planning process. They are on the project management team and participating in the discussions.
So we are able to kind of shape the RFP to have local priorities. So we had been commenting like maybe we want to see cross sections, maybe we want to have like north, south, east, west, bikeways. Like maybe like we're trying to put that in there so our local priorities are not lost in the like very vague state.
Great,
Right.
my only comment on that is that you should take the maybe out of that.
Well, I mean, this is our comments to the state.
Yes,
We-
it's our
we
comments.
haven't heard their response to our comments yet. So yeah, the scenario planning process is very state driven with limited local involvement. This is going to be much more local driven with state involved. So the other thing we are recommending, or I'm recommending, is that we put the financial analysis up front so that as we are doing community engagement, we have the people know that it's not just a wish list, right? So because, if we only have a certain amount of money and somebody suggests that they want to underground I-5, okay, it's sort of like that's probably not going to fit within our financial. And the financial constraint is also ODOT. It does include state. We have to also plan for state in our plan.
Any other questions? Thank you. We will move on now to item 5, Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Cascadia Regional Annual Meeting Recap. Juliana, I'm assuming that's you?
So I was able to go to the annual meeting for the Cascadia Regional Network, and a couple of takeaways that I wanted to share with the group. It's a really great regional network, and one of the best things about it is it can build capacity, especially since I am one person. I can kind of take advantage of some of the programs that other communities have already built, some of the other consulting work that other communities have done, and adapt that to our community and move that forward to kind of fast track some of those programs. Some of the things that they had going for them, especially with the more developed communities in the region, they have funding opportunities that seemed pretty interesting to me. So some of them were based on taxing the carbon industry. So like gas stations, if they aren't going to have DC fast charge, they would get a very substantial increase to their regular business tax. And if they did operate DC fast chargers, they would keep with the same tax rate. And so it would help fund sustainability initiatives for those who weren't willing to privatize that step towards DC. And then the other thing that some of the sustainability departments did is they had ways to kind of charge interdepartmentally. So for providing sustainability services, they would kind of recapture from some of the energy savings or other savings that they would help provide interdepartmentally. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then there are kind of 3 pillars of where sustainability work gets done. It's in educating, incentivizing, or regulating and enforcing. Newer programs are normally more in educate and then moving towards incentives, and more established programs are in incentive with a little bit of education. And then the well-established, well-resourced communities have widespread education, incentives, and enforcement. So seeing where we can kind of leverage each of those. And then one of the cool things that I got to see was the district energy. So in the US, not a lot of municipalities have energy that they generate and distribute. So seeing that being done was pretty cool. they were using GeoExchange, which is online uninsulated pipes that are going underground and leveraging that temperature differential to provide low carbon energy and heating for buildings and residential. And then there was EV car share program in Portland. They worked with Rocky Mountain Institute to do a study on low income multifamily and to see what their current mobility options were. And one of the unfortunate things they uncovered is people in those situations sometimes have to use the most readily available, cheapest option, and that sometimes is the haul truck. And so hearing that kind of anecdotal, this is what people do in a pinch, here are some other options. They are looking into how to establish rideshare, EV rideshare at low income multifamily.
You mean U-Haul trucks not to move things, but just to travel?
Go to
Yeah,
work.
just to go to work,
Oh,
go to
interesting.
appointments. So a very high
$19
emitting.
a day.
Venture from Lowe's.
So they're looking at kind of circumventing that type of single-use trip transit. And then there are some municipalities who are looking into kind of outsourcing their fleet for certain things, obviously not like a back truck or anything like that, but for some of the smaller vehicles, having it be with the rideshare. So then somebody else is managing that. And there are two ways they can do that, where either employees would just go into the municipal account and register for a rideshare, or they would have primary and first use during business days, so Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then evenings and weekends it would be available for the public car share. So interesting ways to right size a fleet at a community scale. And then finally, there was a lot of talk on Climate Lens, which brings us to the end of the topic, unless there are any questions on that. So the Climate Lens is a tool for decision making. There are a couple different types of tools. There are some local examples that are currently in pilot phase, and then we can talk about pros and cons. This is meant to be a policy discussion. So as much as I have stuff up here, I would love to hear more of like what you all are thinking in terms of what you want out of such a tool. So first, where does this tool come into play? So what is the nexus that triggers a Climate Lens to be applied? Is it a new policy? And would that be at a department level, or would it need to be citywide? Would it be a new procedure? So procedures are more task oriented and less general. Would it be a new program? Would it be funding? Would it be existing or new? If it's existing, would it be like a stamp of approval in the budget book? Or if it's new, would it be verifying that programs or policies are, funding would be a go, no go? And then would it be something that has required city council action, or are there other ideas of when you would like to see it applied?
This is where you want feedback?
All along the way, if you want to wait till the end, I have time for that too.
Well, I always have something to say, but I'll hold your time.
Up to you.
How many more? It's hard not knowing where we're going.
Okay, I will go and then just keep this in mind and we'll circle back.
Okay, sounds good.
That'll work.
So the first type is quantitative. So this is a scoring tool for identifying projects that meet or exceed a threshold for sustainability. Something that kind of sets this type apart is it is use of modeling and expert analysis to identify significantly beneficial projects. This one is more suitable for robust policies, programs, or funding. The example community uses it when different departments or divisions are applying for carbon tax funds. The regional community is currently piloting this program, so I'm not going to discuss that program's name. There are examples that are out of Ontario, Canada's Clean Air Partnership Program. So this is the example. They have three criteria. The first is go, no go. So they ask Is it a climate related emergency? Is it an isolated emergency? Is it critical to health and safety? Risk caused by climate change? And then the other go, no go criteria, does it reduce greenhouse gas emissions or energy consumption? Is it part of the city's climate action strategy? Does it reduce greenhouse gas emission or is it a critical enabler? Critical enablers are reducing energy consumption, which could help electrification efforts. And so if it doesn't meet one of those two criteria, it's a no-go. So it wouldn't go through this process at all. If it does go through those, it would have either it would go through the quantitative criteria. So this is where you'd find the modeled extent of emissions reduction. You would know the cost of that initiative. You would see how it plays into environmental justice. So that could interplay with the equity scoring tool. And it would look at the health and resiliency and flow safety. So that would be the quantitative. And then they would look at some qualitative. So because that doesn't encompass all of what's going on in the city, they have it look through a little bit more of descriptive things. So that's where you would talk about if it has organizational alignment. So is it a council priority? Would it improve organizational effectiveness? Is it something of community interest? And then other considerations would be internal resource capacity. Do we have the people and the funds to make this program go? Were there recent investments in similar initiatives? Is there additional funding? So if we're looking at electric vehicles, there's IRS funding. So would we say there's a component of that that wouldn't have to go from other budgets? And then is there urgency? So is it something like if we don't improve energy efficiency, we'll have to improve the capacity of our buildings' energy consumption? That is an example of that type of policy. So it looks through different criteria and then you get kind of a score and a narrative to see if that would go through, and in this case, if that would get funded.
Just a question.
Yeah.
So the top one where it says a climate related emergency. So you're saying it has to be an emergency. So if that's a no, then it's a no-go?
So it has to either be a climate related emergency or
Okay.
reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a qualitative example, which is more of a questionnaire. This is a low barrier option, and it's more of a way to connect with climate action staff. It's ease of use, so non-experts can look at it, can evaluate their projects, policies, programs, and get some help and collaboration around achieving the city's climate goals. This nexus could be a lot lower barrier because it wouldn't require as much staff input. And there's a regional community that currently has this in draft form. And then outside of our region, there's Huron County has been using something similar to this for the past couple of years.
Is that California or Canada?
Canada.
That's it.
They're all in Canada, except for this one has a draft that's local, but not out yet. So these are some examples of questions that could be asked. You'd want to know like what the policy is, so have them describe that. How does it contribute to Salem's climate action plan and emissions reduction goals? Are there climate mitigation or adaptation measures implemented into the plan? Give a little more detail on if so, what are they? If not, why not? Will this initiative result in an increase, decrease, or the same amount of emissions? And then if unknown, how would that be tracked? So again, we're not asking them to have any details on that specifically. I can go in and help them look through that, and there are tools that I can connect them with to get more details on that. And then how does this option compare to other options in terms of climate impact? What factors are considered in selecting this option? Are there opportunities to enhance this project? What are the associated costs and implications? How will it be monitored and evaluated for alignment with Salem's CAP? what natural hazards are in this initiative, or are this initiative resilient to? What measures are in place to ensure that it remains resilient and will be able to adapt to a changing climate? And then how does it engage with and address concerns of vulnerable populations and ensure equitable access to benefits of climate action? So if we're looking at those two types of tools, the quantitative tool and the qualitative tool both make climate action a priority for the city. They both, or they can both provide data on emissions reductions, so it's not required in the qualitative. And then the quantitative is less susceptible to bias. They both embed climate impact into decision-making process. The expertise that's required of other staff is only in the quantitative one, whereas the qualitative does not require outside staff to have that expertise. The policy nexus is for the quantitative tool would be for bigger programs. For the qualitative, it's more flexible to be for smaller programs because it would require less lift. And then the administrative burden, there would be a lot upfront for training other staff for how to go through a quantitative one versus a qualitative questionnaire. And then there's more alignment with limited staff time in smaller programs, as well as smaller municipalities, or more of a qualitative one. So that's kind of the overview on both of those. So with that in mind, do we have any thoughts of what we would like to have this look like?
I'm having a little bit of a hard time wrapping my head around it. So I'm not quite ready to say, because I haven't quite wrapped my head around it. I think I mentioned to you in our pre-meeting the other day that, you know, we've done some similar work with the equity scoring and stuff with our transit. And I think that that's been a really great process. And so I think modeling it in some similar fashion to that, I think would be helpful, where you can kind of, I think a program, something that's as objective as possible, you know, is always helpful, and less open to scrutiny once we agree, you know, what that would look like and that sort of thing. But I haven't quite wrapped my head around enough to say in more detail about what I think it will.
Can we go back to the slide with the pros and cons? What I really like about the quantitative is that I really think that this is a data-driven issue and should remain so. It's really not up to debate. We need to follow the science. I am concerned about the upfront lift for staff. Obviously, we have concerns there. But I'm also interested to talk a little bit more about the flexibility of the qualitative versus the quantitative, if that makes sense. Because I think when you get to this level of government, you really do need a lot of flexibility to handle some of the smaller projects, some of the smaller issues throughout the city. And so I'm interested to find ways that we could maybe merge the two. Right, is there a third path? But if not, I'm really interested in how do we make the quantitative able to be flexible for the needs of our city, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, yeah. So let me just give an example. There was a couple months ago, someone had reached out about a project that they were doing for a grant, and they had asked how could it be evaluated for it being beneficial to them. And so I went through their proposal, and I was able to get a rough estimate of greenhouse gas contributions. They had a couple different options for that project. So I was able to rate those options based on what is the best for the climate and what would be the worst. And I had the opportunity to give some suggestions of how it would be more beneficial. And so I could get that qualitative bit where they didn't have any of that information coming from it. They could just say, hey, could you look at this? And then I was able to bring back in that quantitative data science of how it would potentially play out in terms of emissions. So yes, we can do something like that.
Yeah, I'm really interested in kind of going down that a little bit, that path and trying to figure this out. I know we're not gonna decide anything at this meeting. I know it's gonna be probably several meetings before we come up with something, but in my opinion, we should try and go down that path. I am really very, very leery of bias in this whole thing. And I also want
You're
to,
leery, or you're concerned that bias will play a factor.
I am concerned when we talk about the qualitative. I think that we're gonna start having some really hard conversations about climate change and the impacts on our community. Not only because our climate is changing faster than I think any of us are ready for, but that the changes that need to be made are going to have impacts on how people live, and people do not like change, and they don't want to change. We saw that in the information that you gathered from the open house and the surveys. I think they all are smart enough to know what needs to happen, but knowing what needs to happen and then sticking with it to make sure that it happens and then adjusting your own life to fit the new reality is going to be the hard part of this conversation. And that's where this is going to come into play. And I think this needs to be, I don't want to say firm enough, but strong enough in order to endure that kind of public struggle. Did any of that make sense?
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I was gonna mention the equity scoring thing because going through that and how successful it was to look at the projects for the bond especially. And the whole incorporating elements of both the quantitative and qualitative tool. I need to go back and look at your slides again. You know, this is a lot to digest really quickly. In terms of bias, I mean, even the economic impacts versus lifestyle changes. And as you said, a lot of people realize what we need to do as long as somebody else is doing it. So, yeah, no other, thanks.
So again, not making a decision today, but just so I'm reiterating what I'm hearing, is there a thought that anybody is more leaning towards having the climate lens applied, or is the thought that what I was hearing was kind of more universally, like anytime it can be applied, apply it and things?
That's for me. I think that climate change is underlying every single issue that city council faces, whether it's our unhoused crisis to our transportation system to our planning for our future. The underlying current of all of it is climate, and I think it should be.
Agreed.
Whatever you name it.
Right. So what I heard, what I kind of am hearing is that we'd like a kind of a third option, something that kind of incorporates the best of both worlds.
Yes, I will look into that and I will see if I can make
We would like
it.
perfection from you.
I was just gonna share, this has nothing to do with leadership. This was fresh off our conference. I thought this was a great tool we should be using, so I think there's still quite a bit of vetting, but
Yeah.
let's go ahead and share it. And great.
Yeah, today's kind of
It's very hot.
very hot.
Um,
Okay. So we are, is that it? Anybody have anything else on that one before we move on?
What are the next steps? What, I'm guessing it now needs to go to leadership and kind of get vetting there,
Or
or
to do that, I was gonna do some more work and then take it to leadership. I guess.
Yeah, we'll be trying to develop a hybrid perfection.
Okay.
That then something that can go to leadership team for additional vetting and come back.
So we'll just get an update at our next meeting. Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that sounds good. I really liked your example with how you approached that proposal.
thank you.
Incorporating both. And I think that's the sort of thing we need to do.
All right. So we're now on to strategy EN01, creating and implementing, oh no, we just did that one, sorry. Climate action plan updates, Juliana. The work sort of feasibility study.
Thanks, John, for staying on this long. So we recently finished the airport solar feasibility study. And what I have here is one of the tables that they provided in the report, and based off of the payback period and a couple other factors, kind of the financially viable option is for solar covered parking. And then in addition to providing some energy benefits, it could also have improved resiliency if we pair it with battery storage or some type of microgrid technology. And then either from directly the solar panels or based on having the conduit infrastructure there, we could also incorporate EV charging. And that was kind of the main takeaways from that. John, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Hi, good morning, everyone. No, I think that's a great summary. I mean, this is a pretty stark, differentiation between ground-based systems and roof mounted. One thing we are asking our consultants for is to extend the study out just a little bit to include the former Hertz property that we did not own when this study was undertaken. So assumption being, of course, that roof mounted and covered parking over there would be the same. So hopefully we'll have a scope and a fee for that here this week. And other than that, I don't think I have too much more to add. From a sort of a business perspective, I like the idea of covered parking with solar panels. I know I've seen a lot of other reports with those because not only does it provide the climate impact and the ability to offset our energy use, which is a cost savings, but it also then provides a customer service piece, where people can park under cover out of the rain and out of the sun. So kind of a win-win there. But other than that, I don't think I have too much more to add. This is certainly not my area of expertise. So thank you, Juliana, for helping me pedal through all of this. And thank you for the committee, to the committee, for those of you that helped get the funding for this. Is really, really important.
Councilor Bernie?
I wanted to say, I mean, I agree with what you're looking at here, basically looking at the simple payback period with the years. I guess some of my concerns were it was the roof arrays and the carport arrays that had the biggest issues with glare, but it looked like maybe they could be addressing those.
So I think that there is a new tower. John, please correct me. I'm not.
Tower is moving.
Okay.
The federal government is moving our tower probably to the other side of the airport. So glare, where our terminal is much less of an issue for the tower.
Right. Yeah, I think the broad answer to that is once the air traffic control towers move to the east side of the airport, all of the existing glare issues will solve themselves. And that's not identified in this report because, again, it wasn't a known quantity at that point.
Sure, that makes sense, but how far ahead in the future is that going to be?
It's actually coming up.
Okay.
It's in the.
I would say the next 2 to 5 years, likely. It's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and all of that funding is required to be spent by 2030. So we're already into the environmental analysis on the parcel on the east side of the airport between the National Guard and Garmin. So we're moving along at a pretty quick pace. I would guess in the next 2 to 5 years we'll have a new tower up.
Okay, the federal incentive, where's that coming from? Is it grants or is it from the infrastructure?
So I think that one is part of the IRS's direct pay program. So IRS typically, you couldn't, as a government entity, you don't pay taxes, so you normally couldn't get those benefits. So IRS created direct pay, which is the ability to directly pay government entities for their efforts like solar panels and EVs.
Okay. Don't we have solar panels on the new police station? On the
Yes.
parking?
They actually asked me to get that information to the consultants, help them get that before.
We have them in a variety of places.
Okay,
But
thank you.
my one other question is, does it make sense to make parking better? I mean, are we doing a good thing with having more solar, but yet incentivizing more people to drive to the airport? Like, I'm wondering.
So what's the current alternative? Is it rideshare? Because then that would be 2 trips as opposed to 1, or 2 trips each way as opposed to 1.
Well, currently most people do people, because our airport is so convenient and centrally located, we're not seeing much parking. And so people are just getting dropped off, because it's, basically 15 minutes from anywhere in town to our airport. And so we're seeing very little parking revenue because of that. So it's not even ride share necessarily, I don't think, it's just family and friends. But so I'm wondering, I don't know, I just tossed that question out there. Because it just seems counter to our other efforts. Not that I'm opposed to solar, because I'm absolutely not, of course. But I don't know. I just concerned about time.
It's a good question. I mean, I do think if people are getting dropped off and picked up, that's 2 trips versus a couple parks would be 1 trip. Potentially there could be some benefit from that, but it's something that like to go.
Well, and I think as the airport expands services and will attract more people from outside the area, that'll make a difference. I mean, the people that work at the train station, for example, because of the convenience it has, so there might be more people parking there.
I think that's a great point, Counselor, and I also think that there's an opportunity down the road when we have a need for increased parking, that covered parking then could be offered at a premium rate. And so then uncovered, more distant from the terminal would be maybe an economy lot as opposed to a short-term, premium parking lot.
Yeah, I think that a future without any cars is very hard to imagine. I think I'm with you where I'm trying to figure out we have something tonight on our agenda at council that's hard for me, right? Because we have all these competing things happening, but I think it's something that actually the climate lens would actually help us get through something like this and kind of get to the bottom of it. But I also think that as the climate intensifies in its extremes, having covered areas for people might actually be needed. And if we do have them, that it is creating energy. Again, right? I mean, it's all hard.
Yeah, it was just a thought that came to my mind. I just wanted to toss it out, but I like the idea that John, your suggestion about the premium parking, and that sort of thing. I think that's a good idea.
I know that's popular in Arizona.
Yeah.
If you can get your car under.
Also in places with giant hail. If you go to places
Giant.
really bad hailstorm with the big, because people will go on flight and come back and their car will be destroyed when they have those giant hailstorms.
I had a question about this kind of solar on our city-owned parking garages.
We don't have roofs.
I know we don't have roofs or covers right now. I'm just saying, like, if we put a carport type thing on a city-owned parking garage, would it work to do solar there?
The only thing that adds some complexity is you have to check and see if structural integrity is enough to support that additional weight.
I guess we could just not have parking up there and just make it the roof.
Or they covered parking.
And then everybody would have covered parking. Sorry, we digress. Just a thought. Carry on.
Thank
So
you,
you
John.
get people into the parking garages.
Thanks, everyone. I've got the FAA waiting on the other line, so I'm going to go ahead and log off. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John. All right, update on EECBG and Municipal Energy Master Plan RFP with a lot of letters and not a lot of words.
EECBG, Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant, and then the Energy Master Plan. We had an RFP that went out. We were unsuccessful on that one. We tried to have large economies of scale, thinking that if we just did the scope of the whole city, that we would get some, some price reduction in that. But unfortunately, that didn't have a price reduction, and it also didn't have the expertise required. So instead of trying to shoehorn those proposals into what we were looking for, we decided to look at it from Part A and Part B. Part A being buildings and parks or things that are in the general fund, and Part B being municipal operations for potable water, wastewater, and transportation, signals, and streetlights. And that could be done through utility funds, whereas the Part A could be done through the grant. So that is currently what we're thinking. We have it under review with World Resource Institute and Energy Trust of Oregon. So hopefully they can provide any additional feedback that might make this this round of RFP a little bit more successful.
Any questions or comments on that? Thank you. On to energy savings program contract and US Brown Banking.
So if you look past the minutes on your agenda, they have provided us a little fact sheet. The U.S. Department of Energy is asking if we are interested in being a partner or a sponsor organization for this program, where they are trying to get 1 billion in measured and verified savings by 2030. And I gave a graph here because I am not good at explaining it without it. So what energy savings performance contracting is they do technical audits of your building portfolios, and that gives the baseline energy cost. And then there is a private company or an ESCO that comes in and pays for those upgrades to make it more energy efficient. So you have in that green, the dark green and the light green, those are your cost savings from that energy efficient upgrade. And then from that, you pay what that darker shaded green, and sorry, it wasn't the best graphic. The slightly darker shaded green is what you'd pay back that company that upfront paid for those upgrades. And then at the end of that contract, you would take back over the operation and maintenance. You would, during that contract, you would receive a portion of the energy savings, and at the end of it, you would receive full energy savings minus whatever it costs for operation and maintenance.
That's the part I'm confused by. What do you mean by we would take back the operation and cost of what?
Of whatever upgrades they did. So normally they do like a portfolio of upgrades with both small, short paybacks like LED lights and big, long paybacks like furnaces. They look at your building portfolio, they figure out what you can improve the energy efficiency of. They pay for that, they get those upgrades, and then you pay a portion back to them from those energy savings.
Is there an upfront cost?
No.
What's the downside?
It requires, so I guess there's not an upfront cost in it. You do have to do technical audits, and those are expensive, but that sometimes can be looped into your contract. But it is just the administration of it. You are looking at measured and verified savings, so you have to have programs where you can verify and measure those savings.
So for instance, with this building, as we're getting ready to, do the seismic retrofit and do a lot of things that I think are going to make it much more efficient, would this building be eligible for that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. So this
Because we would want to
normally-
do that, all the assessment now.
Yeah.
before we make it.
That's normally the thing. They're looking for companies that are doing those energy assessments. They're getting that energy efficiency improvement. I don't know if you can be like, we're going to do this anyway, and we can measure it and verify it for you. I don't know if that would qualify under that lens, but I can look into if that would qualify for it. But normally it is like outsourced to somebody else's finance.
Sure, no, I get that. But I guess I'm not seeing the downside. But I don't know what I'm
But
missing.
that makes me leery.
Right, I'm like, I gotta be missing something.
Wait a second.
Is there a minimum project size?
That's actually an interesting question because there's not, but it's one of the things that they need a really broad assortment of projects for it to be financially viable for them. And so one of the problems with rural communities is they normally don't have enough of a scope. But I was thinking about it, and I reached out to our contact at Department of Administrative Services, saying if they would be interested in possibly, if it's beneficial on both parties, if we go through with this, looking at kind of creating a co-op around an energy savings performance contracting, so we could both get the best deal possible kind of thing. And they were interested if something like that were to work out.
What about Sam kind of public schools?
Absolutely. I think that the more people that you could get in, they might be more interested in doing one on their own, but I mean, getting them into some type of a program would be really beneficial.
Well, go ahead.
Or how long are the contracts? I mean,
Those are all based on different projects. Normally, you're looking at long-term financing for 25, 30 years.
okay, so it doesn't come back to us for 20, 30 years.
You
whatever.
still get a portion off the top, and if you're looking at when to establish some of these projects, we're having really substantial increase in energy costs. So the earlier that you do this process, the more you get back because you're not spending as much energy with those energy.
So we're staying tuned. Sounds like people are generally intrigued, but.
Do you want me to go
Not yet.
forward with the partnership or sponsorship?
Well, we don't, I think we can work.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what's in the fine print that
Right.
once you sign up for this, what do they get control of?
Right,
So
right.
I think
Oh,
those
more
are some
details.
I think taking this to the leadership team would be a really good idea right now first, and just getting their take on it.
Okay.
Okay, employee idle reduction campaign, and I note that we have about 12 minutes left. I do have an 11:30, so we can get on time.
All right.
Or actually, we have 14 minutes.
All right, so just quick, one of the programs with coordination with Fleet Services and Employee Wellness, City Manager Keith Stanley suggested doing a summer idle reduction program. And so we are encouraging employees to, when it's safe, turn off their vehicles. Obviously, this week is not the prime example, but when it is safe temperatures outside and when they are not operating power takeoffs, to turn the vehicle off when they can. And so idling can be avoided by driving upon startup and turning the engine off when running an errand. So those are the real times that we're targeting turning off the vehicle and reducing idling.
How much of this is a suggestion and how much of it is required?
It is part of city policy, but to get people to change their behavior, we are just providing education and some great comments that I heard at some of the employee outreach. Street Supervisor Brandon, he has instilled this in his team. They were all on board with it. They were all excited about the program. So we are hearing that when it comes from supervising staff, it is being adhered to a little bit more. And we don't have anybody who has the time to go taking keys out of cars, but that is kind of what I guess used to happen, and trying to get more friendly face to have people choose to participate.
There is Tim Schmidt with facilities. He actually tracks all the vehicles on idling. I'm not sure if you've ever seen any of those reports, but he shares that
How do they know?
fairly regularly.
So it has a program called GeoTab, and they set thresholds, so more than 3 minutes, 20 seconds.
The Big Brother stuff. Awesome.
And they also have it with,
Well, we track our employees geographically.
Right,
So
right,
they're-
of course.
they're-
Yeah.
From the chip.
I prefer accountability to be clever, but
Yeah.
I've heard it called geosnitch.
Geos.
We used to do that in law enforcement. It was a whole different thing. Interesting.
okay, so we have the data, right, we're collecting the data, and it's primarily inspirational and to some degree competition as opposed to regulatory innovation.
So you'll be able to look at the end of the summer and see if there was impact. Cool.
As long as the temperature goes down.
Yeah. Right now it can't measure it because it's above that 80-degree threshold.
Right.
And then we had some community engagement with, I'm sorry.
Pandering.
Yeah.
To the committee member.
So we are helping with getting some of the conservation words out about water, both indoor, outdoor, and home energy conservation. And this can hopefully lead into one of the Sustainable City Year programs initiatives around home energy, weatherization, and heat pumps. So laying groundwork for that. And if people are interested, we can provide those. And the indoor and outdoor water conservation is in partnership with the water quality team in Public Works. Powering Through Green Power Partnership. Pun not intended, but there is a program that City of Salem used to be involved in. I think that the person who was administering it retired, if we want to get back onto it, it's literally just like, there's some street signs that show that people in the community choose to have, green power through the base mix and through, voluntarily signing up to the programs like the Green Future. We heard back in March from PGE on that. So it's a way of kind of showing that our community is involved in that. And the Green Power Partnership would be for like City of Salem in particular, because we buy enough renewable energy credits to qualify. So if we are interested, all that one is a reporting requirement annually, and I could do that starting next year. You're interested?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. And then last thing is I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention. The last 3 pages of the agenda were the memo from ICLEI, and that is the organization that has ClearPath, which is what we do our greenhouse gas inventories from. And there were a couple of mistakes made, and that happens. We get better over time at learning how to do inventories, emissions inventories, and we also have different protocols over time. And just these were partially based on it being counted as a lagoon rather than as a anaerobic digester. And part of it, it was being counted as scope 1 instead of scope 3. It's a scope 1 city emission, but a scope 3 community emission because it's not within the boundaries of City of Salem. So it's kind of in the weeds complexities there.
I caught that, but I didn't want to say anything. I should have spoken up.
So I just wanted to bring it to y'all's attention and suggest that moving forward, having it done internally from staff would reduce these issues by a little bit because we have more understanding of the operations as opposed to consultants. And then acknowledge that we don't know all of the protocols and a lot of it's new science. So going forward, there will be, here's how we count this now and things like that. So just knowing that there is better science to come and do not let that impede our progress and move forward with those.
Thank you.
So, all I have.
Since we have a couple minutes time after lunch.
Yep.
Okay, have we looked at our code, so like code enforcement, stuff to see if any of them are in conflict with the climate action plan?
No, I have not.
I'm wondering, I got a really interesting email from somebody who, got a little note from a code enforcement officer to mow their lawn. And there were some restrictions on how long grass could be. And their pushback to me was that, not necessarily good for the climate to be keeping your grass shorter. And so they were, they happily mowed their lawn to comply, but we're just wondering if maybe that needed to be looked at as we move into a new future where we understand lawns better and their environmental costs. Just wondering if maybe there are other things within our code that maybe are in conflict just because they've been there for so long.
I think that's an interesting question, but you also have to look at not just that particular issue, but I mean, it's really, do we need a code change about lawns, not
Right.
about how high the weeds can get.
Right.
Because I think we're talking about fire safety,
Mm-hmm.
and those sorts of things, and not just weed spreading and a variety of things. I mean, I think it's a whole,
I know.
yeah, there's a whole.
Yep.
a
And
whole
that's where we start getting into that conflicting part where we're talking about, right? When you were talking about parking versus
Right.
covered, right? And then
Right.
now we're talking about not brown lawns and things.
That's all I need.
I know. I'm just
Future battle.
asking.
All right, is there anything else?
I don't think so.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all in September.
You have 6 minutes.
Wow.
I know.
Get to your next meeting.
I know, luckily I don't have very far to go.